This meeting is now being recorded.
Thank you for joining today's webinar powered by SoundPath Legal's Global Meet webinar tool. If you would like more information on today's webinar tool, please use the contact information in the chat box. Today's webinar will be recorded for later replay. Please direct all questions to the Q&A button at the top of your screen. All conference lines will be muted. At this time, I will turn the conference over to today's moderator, Elizabeth Gooch.
Thank you. Welcome to the LMA Capital Chapter Programs webinar, Conducting an Effective Sponsorship Audit with Jean Hammerstrom, Chief Marketing and Business Development Officer with Benesh, and Ben Greenswag, Principal and Co-CEO of Momentum. I'm Liz Gooch, the Program Chair for the Capital Chapter. As noted, the participants' microphones are muted for the program. However, we would like this to be interactive. There are two ways you can participate. First, Ben and Jean have developed a series of poll questions that will be administered during the presentation. Look for these to pop up at several points, and answers will be shared immediately. Second, as noted, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A icon at the top of your screen. We will be checking these throughout the program and incorporating them into the presentation. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to Ben.
Thank you very much, Liz, and thank you everyone for joining here today. I'm Ben Greenswag, Principal and Co-CEO of Momentum, and I'm here with Jean Hammerstrom, Chief Marketing and BD Officer over at Benesh. Jean and I have known each other for many years, and I promised Jean I would help spare her voice a little bit. She's battling a nasty bug but still wanted to participate. So Jean, I will do my part, and we can dive into it if that's okay.
Right. Go for it. Thank you, everyone, for having us today.
Well, this was a very interesting project to work on, and I will let Jean do much of the talking, although maybe a little bit less with her illness. But this was a very interesting project, and as you can see here from the slide, Jean had reached out and basically was trying to understand and defend the level of investment they were making in this term called marketing sponsorships, which we're going to get into that in a little bit, but it was a very broad term, and Jean's first challenge was just trying to understand what exactly was quantified as a marketing sponsorship, because until you can actually measure something, you have to define it. Jean, do you want to add a little bit of color to the background here?
Right. Quite frankly, what was happening is, I've been here, 9 years, and every year this would be, second to meals and entertainment, this would be the biggest line item, and it was over every year by at least, $100,000, $200,000, and we're like, whoa, something is just not right here, and we couldn't get metrics around it to figure out, was this good investment at all? So that's when I said to Ben, we got to put a new process in place, which is what we're here to talk about today.
Great. So we're going to start with our first poll question just to get a sense of the audience to see where everyone fits in. So I'm going to launch this little poll here. So if you can just give us a general sense on how many attorneys does your firm employ. And then as soon as the polling is done, we will share the results so everyone can see. In fact, let's see if I can do this in real time live. Jean, can you see this on your screen too?
I can see the question.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to close the poll in just about 10 seconds. Okay. It looks like we have about 18%, 10 to 100. Someone just voted. I'm going to close the poll right now. All right. So let's view the poll. We have, I don't know if anyone else can see this, but I'll share it, of course. We have approximately 17%, 10 to 100, 22%, 101 to 250, 11%, 251 to 500, and 50%, 500 or more. So certainly a nice cross-section here. Now we're going to talk about the next poll question to make sure everyone stays awake and involved here. And this is really more about trying to understand how you track sponsorship. Notice the third choice, which is by both. You don't necessarily have to say if it's effective or not yet. That's hopefully part of this. But we're going to launch the second poll question here.
And by the way, that was a challenge to me because I had to do by both.
Yes, that's a really good point. So I'm going to try to launch this next poll question here. And then, Jean, I'm actually going to ask you to talk about this once we get the results in here. Okay. So, Jean, while we're getting some responses back, can you talk about that, how you went about actually tracking sponsorship by area and office?
Right. Well, we'll call it you just put your thumb up in the air and see which way the wind's blowing every year for budget. They'd sit down with the group leaders and say, okay, you spent, $50,000 last year on sponsorships. What's it going to be this year? Oh, just add 5 more. And then there would be some disagreement whether, say, it was a real estate attorney in our Indianapolis office, whether it went to the practice group or to the office. So that had its own challenges, and I would just, make my best judgment on those kind of things. So some of them were, I couldn't even get my arms around if they were office or practice group because they were sort of hidden in different places. And I think that was probably on purpose as well. But, yeah, so it was challenging.
So not terribly surprising, 61% both. 23% practice area, 14% by office. So let's start with the case study in the particulars, which was what did Benesch want Momentum to specifically do? So we wanted to conduct an audit of the activities, reviewing all the signed contracts, identify cost reductions, look at how we can help with the negotiated benefits, and then classify and quantify the firm ROI. And these are all very challenging questions to address. Probably the very first area that I'd want to talk about on this slide here was, Jean, you had a lot of different contracts that were categorized as a marketing sponsorship, yet when we started to really try to identify which one was what, we were maybe I was more surprised than you were, but there was a lot of marketing sponsorship that you really had no control whatsoever, and we would struggle to define as a marketing sponsorship. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there was a lot of, as you can imagine, there was a lot of attorneys. They were coming different ways. Attorneys were on boards, and so we were getting those kind of sponsorships. There were some that were client apps. There were some that were just feel good, got to do kind of things. So they were all lumped in this whole sponsorship thing, so we really couldn't get control over why they were being approved and why I was just signing check requests for them. So it was challenging in trying to figure out which ones were really BD related, which ones were really charitable, civic related, those kind of things. So went to Ben and said, I can't even tell the reason why we did this. And University Hospitals Foundation, it sounds like a really great civic thing. They're one of our biggest clients, so I sort of kind of understood that one. So those were the kind of things we were trying to figure out what metrics were being used to determine these, and by the way, there were none. So.
And one of the other things, and we're going to get into the audit, but there were contracts for high school theatrical productions and local fund walks, which I'm not saying that the firm shouldn't have invested in. It's not my business, and there's a lot of important reasons why we do certain things. But these things, Jean and her team are being held responsible to justify why this is part of this massive spend, and then what's the ROI on a high school theater dinner table sponsorship that Jean had nothing to do with whatsoever. So it was there was certainly a lot of this, which we'll get into. But perhaps not on this slide. The biggest shock to me, and when Jean and I spoke to her as well, was there was a form in place on how partners can go about requesting sponsorship. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm also a big fan of change management. It's something I enjoy personally and something I've done in my professional career. And to me, one of the biggest challenges was that the form to which a partner could go about requesting sponsorship, dollars for a function, also included the check requisition form in the request. So typically, if you'd want to request sponsorship, you would theoretically want to get it approved, and then you would get the form on how to get the funding. But right, Jean, this was literally on the same form when we first unearthed it.
So you knew you got it right away. Yep.
That's exactly right. And you can't even begin to try to compartmentalize your spend if there is no evaluation process built in. So we're going to go into, again, a little of this in some more detail here. But just back to the slide real quickly, we're also going to try to find ways to help Gene negotiate. I mean, part of being at events for 15 years is we had a lot of experience in where you can get a lot more bang for your proverbial buck. How can we work on reducing costs, raising benefits, and then the real big nut here is how do we go ahead and actually manage and drive ROI through a better process. So we're going to launch our next poll question here, which was how many marketing sponsored contracts do you think we reviewed for Gene? Now, Gene, just for everyone's information, can you give us a general sense on how big is your firm, cities, just to get a benchmark?
We have about 170 attorneys. We have 6 offices. The majority of attorneys are in Cleveland. Cleveland, Columbus, Indianapolis, Regis offices in Philadelphia and White Plains, and then an office in Shanghai and Delaware.
Great. So we're going to launch this poll just to get everyone's thoughts here on how many marketing sponsorship contracts you think we reviewed in 1 year only for Benish based upon the size of the office. And Gene, do you want to talk about, while people are completing the poll, how easy or not was it for you and your team to actually pull all this information together to even begin the audit?
It was not easy at all, again, because we had things stuffed in office budgets and practice group budgets, and we also had a regular civic budget that was just general for like the managing partner and office of managing partners to use, so it was really difficult to pull everything together.
And again, I'm sure this is probably not an atypical story, but even though Jean, the more she unearthed how little she had control over a decent amount of this spend, it didn't change the fact that every year her and her team were held accountable for an ROI against it. Is that correct, Jean?
Right, and the other difficult thing was we had accounting people who have been using these codes for 25 years, and that's how we use them. They also were just coding where they wanted to, where it made sense to them.
Okay, so here are the results of the poll. 11% think there were 1 to 50 contracts, 3% think 51 to 100, 18% 101 to 150, 18% 150 to 200, 22% more than 200, and very honest 26% have no clue. So we certainly respect that honesty. 189 contracts. So towards the high end of that.
We missed a few, too.
Yeah, we definitely missed a few. There's no doubt about that. And if I could just reiterate one more time Liz's earlier comments, if anyone has any questions whatsoever, please don't hold them to the end. If it's in the moment, we really encourage you asking it at this point. So obviously, again, broad term and how do we go from here is the next question. So by looking at all the contracts, I tried to find a common theme, and this is all done in consultation with Gene. So I came up with some ideas and assessments and terminology, but all this was approved by Gene because, of course, every firm, everyone is different. But what we came up with was how do we...
And if I can interrupt, though.
Oh, please, go on.
The first meeting we had, we brought you in, we sat down with my managing partner and my COO and said, what are we trying to accomplish here? How can you help us? That kind of thing. So from the beginning, I had the firm leadership involved.
You know what, Gene, thank you. I had that in my notes, and I'm really glad you put that in. I think that was critical because not only was it important that we had their buy-in from this process, but as people will see at the end of the presentation, the implementation could not have happened without their support and, of course, you driving it. So that's a really great point about getting the buy-in from the beginning. And from my perspective, they were engaged. They asked really tough questions, as I'm sure no one here is immune from, but they were absolutely engaged in this process. So we came up with 3 categories: business development, promotion, and community. And this was novel because this follows what I generally categorize as outcome-based assessment, which is if you can actually define your spend by your desired outcome, you'd be surprised how much easier it is to track it. So outcome-based assessment, I'm going to jump back to the last slide. Business development, promotion, and community. And this took a lot of conversation, again, with Gene and the team, which is what was Because everything could be business development, right? But of course, then we'd be back at square one. So how do we understand what would be defined as a promotion, what would be defined as something which we have as community? Now, Jean, another point, if I can ask you to elaborate on, we originally had a philanthropy category in here as well, which I believe there was also some political. Exactly. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and why we kind of removed it for the point of this conversation?
Well, the political one is its own separate animal here, and it has its own approval process, and I, quite frankly, didn't want to be part of it because the attorney in charge of it has such control. I think my managing partner, who is very involved politically, wanted it to be part of this because he wanted to, make it part of the process. But Ben, you helped convince him that it just wasn't the order that we needed at the time. But and by the way, we do a pretty good job of tracking the political stuff because you have to. So it wasn't really part of my department. And then the philanthropy part, we sort of still kept that as part of our, charting. But again, a lot of that, it was just the feel-good kind of stuff. And what we had to do is, affirm.
So, Jean, question for you. At this point in our process, when we certainly had your managing partner and your COO involved and supporting this, were any other members of the firm outside of your team involved? Were partners brought in or consulted at this point? Were practice leaders brought in?
Practice group leaders were. We have a practice group leader meeting every month, and we discussed this with them. And we had to have their buy-in because the process was they approved, and then I got the check request. Well, as we go through this, that process changed.
Can you explain as best as you can what was the overall response? I mean, I'm assuming it wasn't unilaterally, this is amazing that you're questioning how I'm spending my money. How did those conversations go? I mean, I know it was a bit more favorable than maybe I anticipated, but can you explain a little bit on what was the feedback and how you and the team sort of navigated that? Because I think a lot of people on this call are probably sitting here saying, well, maybe we can get this far, but how can I possibly advance it through that practice leader or that partner or getting some kind of buy-in?
Well, I did it by starting in the whole conversation by saying we are $200,000 over our budget. And by the way, not one person, but everyone's contributing to this, and here's what's going on. And so I did it by practice group and just showed them that we had no control over what was going on. A lot of them admitted later saying, I just wanted it off my desk, or I didn't want to make Johnny, mad, so I would just sign it, whatever. And so I think it was sort of a relief to them that we were going to take control of it because they didn't want to have the responsibility of telling somebody no.
Jean, we have one question that's come in. For individuals, did any of your partners have the ability to approve up to a certain amount? So at some firms, individuals can approve up to $500. How did you handle this?
Yeah, we don't have that. I know there's a lot of firms that do the individual budgets and they can only spend so much. There are certain people I would love to do that with. And I think that was a challenge for Ben, too, when he's looking at this, because like I said, a lot of firms do say, you know what, Mary only gets, $5,000 for the year, or they'll do a percentage of your client fees. You can have up to a certain amount. But we did not do that. We do it by practice group as a whole.
Great, thank you. So now that we have these broad categories of a marketing sponsorship, we allow the assessment to begin. So what we've done is we broke down the spend into 4 subcategories. So we wanted to understand, for every dollar that was spent on some quote-unquote marketing sponsorship, what was the purpose, what do we expect to receive, who was the audience, and who was the hosting party? Desired outcome and benefits we'll talk about, but relatively straightforward. Audience, was this an audience of potential clients? Were they influencers? Were they policymakers? Hosting party was very important in this assessment because there are different ROI expectations in my experience when you are working with, say, a nonprofit, a community organization, or a for-profit organization. Obviously, you're paying X dollars to get Y services, and we'll talk a little bit about this as we go on, but it was important to identify the hosting party as we start putting these investments through this grid. Now came probably, Gene, the toughest part of this process, which was the scoring system. We put on this slide, report to a lawyer, think like a lawyer, show me numbers, which was, we realized that in order to make this successful and sticky, it had to be scored, and it had to be scored in a very simple way. I equate to trying to teach my 5-year-old daughter, who's very interested in learning about football, excuse me, trying to explain to her why a touchdown is only 6 points and a field goal is 3 and a safety is 2 and an extra point is 1. It is complicated, and it's a system that we needed to make sure it was easy, which is what is a 1, 2, 3, and 4, and not heavily or underly weight something one way or the other. And so we created.
And getting agreement on what those numbers would be is pretty difficult too.
And that was you led me to my next question, which was, Gene, we're going to talk about the scoring system in another slide or two, but how did you corral consensus building? Because you're exactly right. The scoring is extraordinarily arbitrary. How did you go about managing that internally?
I think I did. The person I probably had the most difficult time with was my managing partner, who is just a really good individual, and to him, giving back to the community is the number one purpose of having this whole sponsorship budget. Although he's a big business developer, but he still feels that this is what this is about. And I tried to tell him, your partners, and speaking with the practice group leaders, really, whenever we ask them why they're doing a certain sponsorship, it always has to do with business development. So I said, why don't we start from there, business development, being scored the highest, and then move from there to the good to do kind of thing. It took a few months, that, Ben, working with him. Working through, I had some of the practice group leaders work with me on trying to get him there. So it was just getting everyone to agree that this is important, and if you want me really to be held to a budget, this is the way I have to do it.
And from my perspective, the message that I kept on echoing when we would have conference calls was, I didn't care what the scoring system was. It didn't benefit me in any way, shape, or form what numbers we agreed to. The client, Benish, had to agree to the scoring system. So having a third party, in this case, Gene, on those calls, trying to just come up with a consistent approach towards scoring, I thought was beneficial because, to use the old expression, I didn't have a dog in the fight, whether something was a 1 or a 6 or a 22. And so I would say to everyone on this call as well, we probably went through 5 or 6 different scoring systems until we found the one that made the most amount of sense for the firm and the culture. So again, it's part of the process. So just a curiosity question that Gene actually asked about, which I thought was a pretty good point, which I will launch here, which is, do you currently score or rank your investments, like sponsorships and things along those lines? We were curious to see if someone is doing this. Again, we don't really necessarily need to know what your system is, but just if you do have a ranking or a scoring system, so to speak, on your investments. And we are launching that poll right now.
So
Gene,
Ben
oh, yeah, sorry, go on.
I have a question from the audience. The question is, it sounds like the scoring was just placing it into a category, either promotional or business development. Were there other factors in the scoring?
Yes. After we close this poll, we're actually going to show the Benish scoring system and then the results. So great question. 2 slides too early. All right. We'll close the poll in 10 seconds. And, Gene, just to make sure that everyone on the call is aware, did you have any scoring or ranking system, even if it wasn't categorized prior to our conversation?
Heck no. No, not at all. We just did things.
Well, it sounds like by the responses here, not surprisingly perhaps, 88% no, 12% yes. I'm actually very curious for the 12% that were yes. If you could maybe reach out to me and Gene afterwards, we'd love to learn more about what that means. So we're going to share the Benish scoring system now on this screen. This is a snapshot from the output. And what you see are the 4 top categories around desired outcome, primary audience, benefits, and hosting party. And each of the 4 possible answers have a number 0 through 3. There is always a 0 unidentified bucket. This was probably, Gene, the more interesting part of our scoring system, which was Well, I don't know if this thing has an advertising benefit or if there's a speaking benefit or a social, and I don't know if the outcome is philanthropy or direct business development. And the conclusion we came down to that we got the support was, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So it should have no value. If you can't tell me, and we'll talk about what this means in a moment, but if you can't tell me if the primary audience is industry, public, community, then you need to be questioning the entire concept of why you're trying to get this project funded. So under desired outcome, which is the top left corner here, obviously the highest score number was direct business development. Now we recognize, and Gene, maybe you can say a couple of words on this, we know that there is still going to be some arbitrary definitions on what is direct, and it's, again, it wasn't my point to say this is the yes and no, black and white, direct business development. But Gene, on desired outcome, can you just give, again, a top line on how you had accepted what direct business development and awareness of philanthropy meant under the desired outcome box?
Yeah, this is something where we know because a client specifically asks that we do something or a prospect that we do something and know that this, for instance, a sponsorship of a program where we know that they're going to be speaking with us or be with us at the event, we know we're going to get something out of it. It could be client relationship or it could be exactly getting work. So, for instance, we just, one of our major clients asked us to do some big event in Las Vegas, which is a really big number, but we knew by going there and sending 2 people that we were going to get some other work out of it. So it's those kind of things where you have to say, okay, what is the direct BD coming out of this? Awareness is more like we're having, our name up there and they know who we are, and it's more of a brand kind of thing. And then the philanthropy, of course, is to do good, be a good citizen kind of thing.
Primary audience, this was a bit more straightforward. Industry, community niche, and public. Community niche, I think the difference between public and community niche really came down in your case to the kind of contracts we were looking. A fun run was something that was, for the general public. And why that was important for those on the call is that when it's general public, what primary audience really means is how qualified is your audience. If it's industry, if they're paying a fee or it's invitation only and you know that they have to meet a certain criteria, that's going to have the most amount of value. If it's specific for a community project, and Gene, I don't know if there's something that pops on the top of your head for community niche, but maybe you want to talk about.
Like the United Way kind of stuff.
Bingo. That's exactly right. And then public, of course, was more general. Benefits, it was pretty clear, and this will probably be no surprise to anyone here. Speaking, or as we more broadly define it as thought leadership with momentum, that's the top benefit absolutely by far and away. There's a lot more that I think would be interesting to come back to this and revisit this, Gene, a year later or so.
Right.
But social advertising was really the lowest scored benefit, and we define that, Gene, if it's just signage, if it's an advert in something, if it's a logo somewhere, it's great, but there are going to be managed ROI expectations around the benefits.
Correct.
And then hosting party, again, this was more a matter of expectations on who you're working with. I'd say probably the thing that made this unique, sometimes for-profit and professional association, those are very hard numbers. It was very challenging, I think, putting 1 out of 3 and 1 out of 2. So these numbers could flip-flop potentially, but again, trying to categorize it, the ROI expectations, maybe at an ABA event as an example or another professional association, we just felt would be a little bit lower than a for-profit endeavor.
And Ben, with your experience having done this for so many years, these sponsorships and all that kind of stuff, we didn't even think about the hosting party. We're like, why is that important? So you really brought that to the forefront with us, and I think my management liked that idea a lot.
Gene, we've got 2 questions for you. The first being, can you, back on benefits, can you talk a little bit more about social? Is that networking, relationship building? How did you define the social piece?
Right. Yes, it is. It's more for the networking, getting to know people. I want to seek people out kind of thing. Just being seen kind of thing.
And then for, I think as Ben just alluded to, professional association and for-profit, how did you ultimately decide that for-profit was higher ranked than a
Well, yes, as he said, we're still discussing it back and forth, but the for-profit kind of stuff is when our client or someone we know in the community is for-profit is hosting something in which we're helping to help them with their benefits, that kind of thing. The professional associations, the transportation lawyers association and those kind of things are pretty darn important for our business development. So again, we could flip-flop on those.
Yeah, I would just add some extra color to that question. It's interesting because a professional association's mission is to advance the causes of the association. Sometimes that is a single focus with respect to content and events. Sometimes it may or may not be market-driven. It's association-driven. So it has a different value proposition sometimes. Now, some associations run conferences that are very much so for profit. They drive revenue to the event, and in that case, I would actually categorize that as a for-profit.
For-profit, yeah.
Whereas a for-profit entity like a conference organizer, a media company that runs an event, that's an event that has been specifically designed to create a buy side and a sell side, bring them together in a room, and try to effect business development. So
right.
that was a
ACG, capital roundtables, those kind of things.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head with that, Gene. But again, this is not a hard and fast definition. Again, if you have the experience or expertise to understand what are the individual events, if you consider a hosting party, the event-specific hosting party, like, an association's annual conference, which, again, mostly is for profit, I would actually quantify that as a for-profit ranking.
We have one more question. When scoring, did you take into consideration if your clients were attending or if they requested your participation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That would be a direct.
That's direct BD.
BD, yep.
That's a number 3 under desired outcome.
Right. Like I said, with a for-profit, a lot of times at these ACG capital roundtables and stuff like that, they're asking us to be there or even to speak,
So in that case, I'm going to get to this, you would have a 2 score for hosting party for association, but you'd have a 3 for direct BD. Whereas you could theoretically be going to a for-profit company, and if you're just getting, a logo on a sign, that would be, a 2, as an example, under desired outcome, not income, excuse me.
And so now we're trying to avoid that because of this process, by the way.
Oh, sorry, that was actually a really good point I was going to lead into next. But, Gene, can you repeat that? Because I think I stepped on you.
Well, no, if we see that we're just getting a logo, then that will determine whether or not we're going to do it. I want more than that, and then we can negotiate.
And so the next slide I'm going to show everyone is on ROI expectation. I have been asked in over 15 years, I can tell you how many times, help me quantify the ROI of a conference. I've spoken to groups large and small about this. Let me tell you, there is no math for ROI. It is not like a media buy. It is not something that I think I have yet to find a way to fully quantify it. Instead, I've always used the terms as an ROI expectation. Should you have a high expectation, a mid expectation, or a low expectation? And so on this next slide, in speaking with Gene and the team, we came up with scoring the criteria and associating, going back to those investment types, what the ROI expectation should be. So if your score adds up to this 1 to 5, it should have a low expectation. Again, going to that initial community box. If it's the 6 to 9, it falls in this promotion, low to mid expectation. If the score is 10 plus, it is clear business development. And again, these numbers can absolutely be parsed in a lot of different ways, which is why it's so important that Gene and the firm bought into it and get it. And the real trick here, folks, is not so much about using this to look backwards, although we'll get to that. It's when partners come forward and try to request money for future projects, Gene can look at this, do a quick scoring, and if it's a 1 to 5 or a 2 or 3, and someone says, well, this is worth $45,000, Gene, because all these great things are happening, Gene and her team now have a general framework to say, really, why are your ROI expectations so high from this $40,000, community-based investment? Gene, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, perhaps?
I might be jumping ahead because I don't remember the slides though, but the other thing is we haven't tallied up all our stuff yet, but if I go back and look and say we have spent all of this sponsorship money on 1 to 5, well, we got to really look at this.
And so that dovetails nicely again into our next slide, which is, again, we talked about the expectations. We talked about, low, medium, and high. And the second bullet point to me is really something which a lot of firms struggle with, which is post-sponsorship activation. You could have something with the highest BD potential and have no follow-up activation, and it will quickly plummet in value. Whereas if you happen to meet 5 of the right people at a community event and you have active activation, we're talking about follow-up, we're talking about engagement, and again, this isn't an activation webinar, that's a whole separate world of conversation, then you could effect an extraordinarily high return on your investment. So activation is the biggest variable, I would think, in fully defining your ROI expectations. And so once we came up with this system and the numbers were approved and the scoring was approved, we actually tested, we actually went ahead and did proof of concept with, I think we did more than 3 contracts, Gene, but there are 3 that come to mind, which we won't share here because that is confidential. But we did score 3 contracts, 3 of the 189 contracts based on this system. And again, I was very pleased, and I'll let you comment on it, but it all matched in with the ROI expectations, both in hindsight and going forward.
Right. Absolutely.
And again, we randomly did a few more contracts, and they all fell within these low, mid to high, and expectations. Going forward on the engagement, then what we did was we calculated the entire spend based upon those 4 buckets. So how much of Benish's spend was being spent on business development, community, and promotion. And then what we did is we connected with 2 other firms that we had relationships with, similar attorneys. Again, every firm is a little bit different, but similar number of attorneys, similar size. And then we asked them based upon their own research, and the ones that I spoke to did have some general groupings of information. And then we compared it to BTI data. And what we've done was we ranked Benish compared to similar firms in the BTI data to know where their business development spend was coming in comparatively. So we'll jump to the poll question, which was, where do you think Benish ranked in their BD development compared to 2 similar firms? And we'll launch this poll right here. And again, probably some of the questions that people on this call have as well. How do you know everything is different? I can't explain this enough. We understand that this is not black and white. None of this information will always fit the same exact mold, but we wanted to create some level of benchmark using the resources available to us to at least shape and drive the questions that Gene could use going forward. All right, we'll close the poll in just about 5 or 6 seconds.
And then this also helped in my discussions with the practice group leaders on the need for change.
Yes. So 45% said you were higher, 31% said lower, 22% you hit the nose.
This
So
is one of
they
those
were
womp moments.
So Benish was significantly lower than the average BTI Firm 1 and Firm 2 in business development.
This is so key because everyone always wants to know what are other firms doing. That's the first question attorneys always ask. So what are other firms doing? So this was a nice picture.
And I think to me was, Gene, in this conversation, what was probably more interesting was not so much the business development spend, but how high the marketing sponsorship that you were being held accountable for and to justify ROI was non-business development compared to 2 other firms.
Jean, we have one question for you. How does post-sponsorship activation affect the scoring after the fact? So are you changing the scoring?
Are we changing the scoring? I'm sorry.
So I think the question is after you've maybe gone through the process, but then you see, as Ben suggested, once you do follow up after a program, are you making changes to the scoring based on if there's been successful follow-up?
So yes, if there's a specific sponsorship, so it has to be 10 plus, where we'll do the post activity and say, okay, this was a BD thing. What do we get from this? Kind of thing, because otherwise we'd be chasing everything. And if we see that certain activities that we're doing are not a 10 plus as we had thought they were, yes, then we're going to change that going forward, because we keep track of all the sponsorships going forward. I hope that answered the question. I hope.
I think so. They can come back to us if it doesn't. Thanks.
All right, and then we're just about wrapping up here, but we're going to talk about one last poll question, a couple of activation elements that stemmed from this engagement, and then, of course, open to any questions, trying to keep us concise and well within our time here. So we are going to ask our last question of the day, which is, of course, where do you think your firm would rank? Higher than average, lower than average, right on the nose. And Jean, how powerful has this information been, knowing it's not, knowing it's not gospel, but knowing what it is based on? How often have you been able to reference and use this in budgeting, in either supporting a partner's efforts or pushing back on a partner's efforts?
We did a good job rolling it out we did roll out to the partners, the associates, and the staff. So everyone was pretty well aware of what's going on. So when people do come to me and have a little bit of pushback, and I'll talk a little bit about the process. We've been successful in sort of taming them, and at least at least I now can say, instead of the 5,000, this really is only worth 1,000 kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So there was no reason to not give them the 5,000 before.
So response, 38% higher than average, 38% lower than average, 23% right on the nose. So on the follow-on activity, recommendations for cost savings is pretty self-explanatory. We went through the contract. We said you shouldn't have paid for this. You could have paid for this. You could have gotten this much more for this level of investment based upon what we know from the other side of the table on how to negotiate contracts. You were spending, I won't give exact numbers, but well north of $20,000, $30,000 for investments, which you didn't need to spend that much to get it, or if you were spending that much, you could have gotten a lot more value. But to me, the biggest thing that I want to finish the last few minutes on here, Jean, is all about the follow-through. So what we've done is using the scoring system and understanding the audit. What we did was we working again with Jean and her team, we completely redrafted the sponsorship request and approval form. And Jean, do you want to talk a little bit about, because there was a lot of back and forth with that form, using the ratings and the scoring systems and the process. Apart from the more obvious answer, which is we removed the check request form from the approval process at this point. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that implementation looked like and how it was responded to?
Yeah, so again, I'm going to the practice group leader saying, I'm going to take this burden off of you, is basically what I said. So the approval process now is a lot, when we went through, it's like, oh my gosh, this looks like more work with these forms and all this kind of stuff, but it really is much simpler because if somebody wants something, they fill out the request without a check request, as Ben said. When the sponsorship form comes to my executive assistant, who we've trained, she then scores it, how we have the scoring there, and gives it to me. And so before I even give it to a practice group leader to sign off on, I will say this is worth it or not. And, make me the bad guy in this whole process. So that's what we're doing. Instead of going right to the practice group leader, instead it's coming to me first. And then we're scoring him. And then, like I said, we keep track of what scores these have, and the higher ones are the ones where afterwards we follow up with saying, so what do we get from this? What's the next steps? How do we do, what do we need to do? That kind of thing. Now, I will tell you, the only The only person that probably really pushed back a lot, and Ben, you helped with this, is our number one rainmaker. Mm-hmm. He would just approve himself. All kinds of big sponsorships up in New York, and they were professional organizations, associations, those kind of things, and for-profit kind of things that really could develop some business. But the whole thought was, hey, we're giving this much money, we have to support him on this. What we've been able to do because of Ben's guidance is say, okay, we'll support him, but can we do it in a better way? Can we get more bang for our buck kind of thing, where we were just saying, okay, sure, we'll have him speak and we'll have a logo on the sign. Instead, it's like, okay, how many tickets do I get now? And what about this event? And can we get that kind of thing? So we're being a little bit smarter about those things even with him.
And to that point also is that as he continues to make rain, I'm sure that if you put his ROI and his investment against what he brings in his billings,
right.
It's a no-brainer compared to compared to others. But this is an ongoing process. Again, it can be measured, it can be managed, it can constantly be tweaked. But I think the big key, and again, to get to our last slide, just questions if there are any, is that in order for this to be successful, it had to have been collaborative. This would not have been successful from an engagement or a delivery perspective had we not gotten Gene and managing partners and the CEO's buy-in from the very beginning.
The only other important point I'll make is that one of the biggest bullet points when we made the assistants understand this is that while this approval process is pending, that the requesting attorney should not tell whoever it is that we're doing it, because a lot of times they just say, oh yeah, we're doing it, and it's like new process, you're not going to be approved, just like when they tell people they'll get tickets for an event.
So, Gene, you kind of led me down this path here. I was going to say, do you have any other sort of final comments or thoughts? And then we see if there are any more questions remaining at this point.
I think that we'll probably use a similar process to other activities in our department, so we can track some of these things. And one of them might be, like I just said, we have suites to every, believe it or not, people, we have suites to the Browns, the Cavs, that's a good one now, and the Indians.
The Cavs are the good one now, right?
So, coming from Pittsburgh, it's been very depressing with these things and all these tickets. I'm going, why are we investing in this? So, I think we're going to do something similarly.
Great. So on that note, Gene, I thank you so much for forging through your illness. Your voice is held. I don't know if there are any other following. Liz, do we have any other questions in the queue at this point?
We have one more question, just a general question. Can you talk a little bit more about the partnership reaction in general? Have most people gotten on board? Are they making more of an effort with their sponsorships as you're rolling this out? Do you see the change that you talked about?
So, in some people, yes. In that main rainmaker, not so much. We just go behind them and negotiate. Yeah, we have seen people have been very cooperative, and I got to tell you, I think by doing a rollout at a meeting with the staff was really key too, because then they'll go to their boss and say, it has to go through this process. They're the ones who I think bring it to their attention. So when they get the information from their boss, and they know what to do. So I think that's key, really getting the staff involved.
I have one more question that came in, or a couple more. Did you consider the risk factor in evaluating sponsorships, as in would we be conspicuous in our absence if we decided not to continue with this opportunity?
Yes, and we just had one last week. It's a big gala event that one of our clients does every year, and I just went to the attorney and said, you know what, as big clients they are, we have bigger clients, we just can't give this kind of money. We're not getting, your relationship should be fine. Excuse me, should be fine with giving a little less. But yeah, there is, of course, because but they'll tell you all the time, but we have to. They'll drop us as a client. And guess what? When we do client assessments, we ask questions like this about these kind of things. They're like, we don't expect it. We think it's nice. One
more question. Do you have you put into place any any post-event debriefs with key people to capture the anecdotal ROI to, again, put back into your rankings?
We have done, again, my assistant has done it individually. So when she sees a 10+, she'll follow up with them saying, okay, so what are your next steps? And then she'll keep me in the loop with it. It'll be an email to me and to whoever that person or persons are to say, so what's the next steps? What do we get from this? We're still working through that, as you always do with follow-up. And this will be our first full year of using this process. So it'll be interesting and to see Ben, actually, he can bring facts back later, how it's going, how it went.
Great. So I don't have any more questions. I want to thank both Jean and Ben very much for speaking and taking the time to put this together. I think the questions and folks have commented that they've really enjoyed this, so thank you. A few people have asked we will offer the PowerPoint. It will be emailed as part of the survey that goes around this afternoon. And additionally, I want to thank again SoundPath for sponsoring this program. Please reach out to them if you have questions or want to do similar webinars with your own teams. Ben, Jean, any last words?
Whoever, if you want to reach out to me individually, that's great too.
Great.
Thank you very much for having us. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Bye.
The program is now ended.